Our next panel, which I am so passionate about, is the health. And health, boy, is so big, and we can take it so many different ways. But I know the woman who's going to facilitate this panel is up for this challenge. I want to introduce Commissioner Toni Carter. Like as I said earlier, all the bios and the accomplishments are so many pages that it will be incredibly not able to do it. But Commissioner Carter is a Ramsey County Commissioner, and she is one of those people who are really very honest, who talks about both issues and also strengths and challenges. You have all of her short bio on here, and please welcome and put your hands together for Commissioner Toni Carter.
Thank you very, very much to Fartun and for this excellent day. Thank you to the university and to all who have participated in putting this together. I just want to start out by saying there's been so much said. I can add very little to the volume that you've already heard, except to say I want to pick up on a few of the things that have been mentioned to us already, focused on family, story, and strength. And of course, all of this is about health. I'm fortunate to be a Ramsey County Commissioner and to realize that at the foundation of all of our success and ability is our ability to be healthy, to be here, and to be well for ourselves and for our family. That's one of the reasons I've focused in my work on ensuring health, in building health, and in specifically, as Dr. Corey has already said, in investing in the health of women and children, our foundation of care and our foundation for the future. It is the very best economic development investment we can all make together. So on strength, Fartun talked about our taking a strengths-based approach, and Dr. Bloomberg spoke about the fact that we have to tell the story. You know, I can tell the story of a family. I was born in Alabama, in the South, as my husband likes to say, up in them hills. And when I go home to Alabama and we are going through those hills, I see my family. And sometimes, if they know when I'm coming, they'll come out on the street and wave because they want to see me go by, you know? And that's really a symbol of support. Back in the civil rights era, when I was a child born in 1954, so you know what was going on in our country then. My mother and my father and I, who had relocated to Cleveland, along with my sister, would travel by car. And you know, we couldn't stop and eat on the way, unless, of course, we were forced to go around to the back and wait, sometimes an hour. We couldn't stop and use the bathroom at every location. And so we had to be prepared. And my grandmother would send us off with boxes of lunch. And they would be lined with that wax paper, and we'd have chicken, and we would have breads of all sorts. Oh, and we would especially have pound cake. Anybody know about pound cake? Yeah. And so we really didn't have to go to the back of those restaurants. We were well equipped, rolling all the way from Alabama to Cleveland, Ohio. And that was because my grandmother, my aunts, my uncles, all the rest of them folk that would line the hills as we went by, knew that we had to support each other. And I'm thankful that we're here today bringing the diaspora together to support each other. Tell that story. That is the story of our strength. So health being the foundation of everything we do, definitely the second side of that coin that has wealth on the other is the topic that we're going to be exploring. And we're going to be telling the story right now. Dr. Bloomberg also mentioned Penumbra Theater, and I can't help but note that that was a part of my beginning and my family coming to St. Paul, Minnesota. And at Penumbra Theater, I actually played Rose in August Wilson's Fences. And, you know, we talk about the fact that we're not here, thank you, we're not here to discuss what we're doing in spite of men. We're here because we need to be strong together. One of my favorite lines in Fences, when Troy was talking about how hard it had been and how he had been discriminated against and the trauma of his life and how he'd been standing in this same place, was to say to him, you know, Troy, I've been standing right here with you. And so we are standing here boldly as women. We're going to talk right now about the work that is happening across our community for women's health. Let me introduce our panel, and our first panelist to speak, I'll introduce last, okay? So I think I have my paper here. Now it's two into that roll of rows. Yes. So let's introduce then our Isuroon Program Director, Saidiyo Yusuf from Isuroon. Give her a hand. And from Ahavah Birthworks, Clara Sharp. Give her a hand. Founder and president of the African Nurses Network, Inc., Lyna Nyamwaya. Give her a hand. And Director of Community Relations, Minnesota Department of Human Services, Antonia Apolinario. Give her a hand. And our first presentation then will be by Antonia. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Carter. As an immigrant in this country, I have been blessed with women like Commissioner Carter, Judge LaJune Lang, and others who have mentored me, who have guided me. So for that, I'm very grateful and very proud to be on a panel that she is moderating. I'm an employee of the Minnesota Department of Human Services. I have been an employee there for 13 years. I started in the Children's Mental Health Division, looking at social-emotional situation of young children, infants and toddlers. And then for the past 10 years, I have been working on disparities reduction, even though from day one, my work has been around underrepresented and underserviced communities that the mission of my agency is to serve. I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that I'm doing at DHS with cultural communities who experience inequities in either receipt of services or how they experience and the outcomes that they have. I would, of course, like to center my presentation around today's date and what we are celebrating, because it's an opportunity for us to recognize that people of African descent represent a distinct group whose human rights must be promoted and protected. The themes as chosen by the United Nations are about recognition, about justice, and about development. We know that there are around 200 million people of African descent in the Americas. That includes North America, Central America, and South America. We do, coming from South America, believe that there are 3 Americas. And that many more million live in other parts of the world outside the African continent. I'm going to start introducing to you just a few words that describe why my work is justified at the Department of Human Services. The Department of Human Services is the largest of the state agencies in the executive branch of state government. If you look at the social determinants of health, which impact our lives, our well-being, and really happen in several sectors where we function, be it in the place where we work, where we worship, where we play, where we study. All the places that we occupy are part of that social determinants of health.
The Department of Human Services is responsible for communities from birth, for a mom who cannot afford insurance to have her baby in a hospital under care, to death. We fund and we regulate the work of the elderly who needs to spend the last days of their lives in a nursing home. So we are a presence in people's lives at every stage of their lives. Disparity, as I mentioned to you, is part of my work, helping our agency better understand what disparities are, how communities experience it, hoping that we then can find solutions so that we can eliminate them. And I took some of these definitions. They are not my authorship, but they are a conglomeration of what I have studied, in which disparity is seen as a difference in health that is closely linked to social, economic, or environmental disadvantage. Health disparities impact groups that systematically experience greater obstacles, including communities of color, American Indians, persons with disabilities, and the list goes on. These are just 3 of the groups that I have identified. On the opposite end of disparities is what we hope to achieve. That's equity. Equity is achieved when every person in a community has the experience to reach their full health potential, and not one is disadvantaged from achieving this potential because of social position or other socially determined circumstances. If a young child is born in a low-income family, that does not mean that that young child is less deserving of a good future, a productive life in their community, and to be able to contribute than another child who is born in a wealthy neighborhood. So that is the assumption around equity. And health, and these are several organizations who have defined, encompasses many aspects, including physical, mental, social, and spiritual well-being. Health is not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. How individuals experience health and define their well-being is greatly informed by their cultural identity. We've heard those terms since the early morning, right? So the way that I define health as a person of African descent who grew up in Islam in the city of Vitória in Brazil, and the way that my friend may define health living in North Minneapolis in a low-income neighborhood may differ slightly, but ultimately we all want to achieve the same goal. The other term is health in all policies. It's a collaborative approach to improving the health of all people by incorporating health considerations into decision-making across sectors and policy areas. Ultimately, the health in all policies approach seeks to institutionalize considerations in health, equity, and sustainability as a standard part of decision-making processes across a broad array of sectors. So just because I am in the Minnesota Department of Human Services and my close association, the Minnesota Department of Health, doesn't mean that just the 2 agencies are concerned about equity. Transportation should be involved, public safety should be involved, education, all of the other agencies if we are looking at this health in all policies approach. What decisions are we making that could cause disadvantage in some groups and advantage in others? One example is the Green Line as it was going through the Frogtown neighborhood of St. Paul. The initial plans was that line would zoom through the neighborhood and businesses, communities would not have the opportunity to participate because there was no plan to have stops at some sites. And what we see today is that those stops are there, and the community continues to be a vibrant, growing community and not destroyed. A lot of my work centers around engagement, because engagement, someone mentioned here, a young woman from the city of St. Paul, how relationships are key. And I live around this principle, that in all of my title as Director of Community Relations is something that I acquired about 5-6 years ago. From birth, my mom has always been a person very much engaged in community, very much a community activist before there was a name for it. And it's from that I learned that my relationship with people is what is going to help me bring the voices of communities into the agency that I work for, so that when we are making decisions, when we are working with legislators about policy, we can bring those voices and those wishes and preferences into the discussion, as well as bring them to the table where they have often been silenced or absent. So it's a process of collaboration and inclusion in which entities build ongoing relationships. It's not an overnight thing, and it's not something that's one and done, for the purpose of applying a collective vision to solve complex problems. So some of the principles that I also use in my work is around participatory leadership, in the sense that I have introduced in DHS, and again, I'm not alone. I'm here representing DHS, but there are so many other people in this journey with me. And what we try to do is that when DHS goes out in the community saying, we are going to do community engagement, and then we prepare a PowerPoint presentation full of acronyms. We love acronyms. And we sit at a table like this. We make the presentation. And then we ask, does anybody have a question? So we are the only ones talking. And we have that point of somewhat authority, right? We are the experts. And how participatory is so much different. You put people in a circle. You bring them into small discussion groups. You ask general questions that everyone has an opportunity to contribute. And the result of that, when you look at the notes, is a richer contribution to the work that we are doing now. So that's how we have tried to do and try to engage this very large organization in this practice. The Cultural and Ethnic Communities Leadership Council is a group of very engaged, diverse citizens that applied through the Office of the Secretary of State to be members of this council, which was created for the Department of Human Services at the request of community members to give advice to the Commissioner of Human Services saying, this community is being impacted in this manner by some of your programs. These are some of the recommendations we'd like to give you to consider. We also, each February, prepare a report to leaders of the Health and Human Services committees in the House and Senate. 8 legislators are also members of this council. As I mentioned, it was created in 2013. We have, in 2015, advanced a series of recommendations to the agency, which now are incorporated into an equity policy that is comprehensive. It talks about how is DHS choosing its leadership into the 21st century. Does it reflect the communities we serve, or is it very disparate and different from the communities we serve? How are we choosing our vendors? Are we using equity lenses to consider, are these vendors appropriate to serve this particular cultural community or this particular community in general? We also, now that we have a policy on equity, we also have an implementation plan that hopefully is going to be enacted very soon. Annual equity review, it's one of the tools that we use yearly to collect information across the agency so that different departments, different divisions can report. If they're funding grants, if they're initiating projects, if they're working on initiatives, what are they doing in order to include and in order to address issues of disparities? So since the beginning in which we had our first report in 2014, the last report that we are now preparing for 2018, we are late, it is already March, has about 110 activities across the agency. Now, for an agency of 7,000 employees, It's small, but when we started at about 40, it's great progress in my book. So change is very slow and gradual. And in this equity review, we inserted that in our legislative report, and legislators really crafted instructions on how they wanted the agency to report to its committees how it's doing in terms of progress or lack of disparities reduction. We have found that when they respond to this questionnaire, that we then analyze all the responses and produce a summary to be included in the report. Some of the challenges that employees have raised is that capacity to sustain equity promotion and disparity reduction efforts, dedicated resources at DHS and across service networks. Sometimes they have a grant for so many years, and then after the grant is gone, they may not be able to sustain that activity. There is a lack of culturally diverse workforce of providers to reflect the users of services, adequate measurement to reflect decline in disparities. We still are using terms in which Asian Americans come all under one umbrella. And we know fully well, for many of us who have been here, that the Japanese who arrived in Minnesota many decades ago has a different lived experience than the Burmese who just arrived. And they are all under this umbrella. So we never have a very clear picture of who is experiencing disparate outcomes and how are they experiencing it. And of course, lack of qualitative indicators to understand the impact of programs and services. I was at a meeting at the Department of Health last night. They have a council similar to the one at DHS, and one of our discussions was around impact and outputs. So outputs is something that us big institutions know very well. Impact is a little bit harder to explain. And how can we show that Mrs. Smith indeed experienced the program well? Her life now is different than when she started in the program. You can count heads and you can count contact hours, but sometimes you need the qualitative story. We talked about story earlier today. The Bush Foundation has funded us, DHS, to engage in other communities to learn about disparities. And I am going to rush here because I know that there are others. So I'd like to share with you some illustration of this work and the people who participate in it and how we have framed some activities to make sure that we're exposing employees, we're exposing the communities to each other so they can discuss very deep concerns in one room. For example, when we visited the race exhibit at the Science Museum, and we brought, no longer with us, Alice Lynch, to debrief. And this, as you can see, a circle in which you have employees from DHS, you have community members, you have people who have used our services. How did they experience this? When you learn more about the history of the peoples who are experiencing disparities, and that helps us to really look at that differently. This is a picture of the members of the Cultural and Ethnic Communities Leadership Council. At the time, this is an older picture. At the time, Commissioner Jessen was our commissioner, and she's back there, as well as Senator Lowry, who is a member of this council, and did come to some of our meetings, engage, and for community members sitting side by side with the senator and discussing issues that are of importance to them was a new experience, but a very needed one in a democracy. And yearly, the senior leadership of the agency comes before the council to discuss their initial thoughts about the next legislative session. What are some of the things that advocacy organizations, community, counties, tribes are bringing to DHS to consider working with legislators that need to be changed or that need to be studied. And here they receive community feedback and questions and back. And then lastly, we participate yearly on the Overcome Racism Conference so that we can report to a larger audience on what DHS is doing, and at the same time to receive input and feedback. In this case, we have senior leadership And we have members of the council making these presentations about their activities, what they're learning, and then receive questions and answers. I'll be happy to discuss some more about it at a later time. Thank you. Thanks, you're here.
So I want to say, is this on? Can you hear me? Just wanted to say thank you to Antonia for the work that she is doing. You'll hear keywords in her conversation that are different than we're typically used to talking about when we talk about health. This is not just about doctors and hospitals. It's about the opportunity to be healthy. It's about health in all policies. And Antonia, immigrant herself, an Afro-Brazilian immigrant, speaks of that voice of community that we need to hear as we create that opportunity. So thank you so much. And while I'm introducing Clara, she will be...
Lyna.
Oh, I'm sorry, Lyna, you're right. Okay, thank you. I'm gonna introduce Lyna next because she told me to. And Lyna is also going to share that voice with you. She comes to us as founder president of the African Nurses Network, and you'll hear keywords in her presentation with respect to, as she enters up, the manner in which we as community can engage together for a healthier life. Thank you so much.
Do I have a clicker or do I enter? Okay. Well, happy International Women's Day. So I am so excited and honored to be here this morning. My name's Lyna Nyamwaya. I want to thank Fartun Welly of Isuroon for inviting me to share the stage with these beautiful, great women. I was born and raised in Kenya by strong women. I grew up in a society where girls were more to be seen than heard. They were good for like arranged marriages or bride price. You've heard about that. But this same society too has great runners, greatest safaris, beautiful clothes, awesome food. But it's also got what we love to say in Kenya is Hakuna Matata. And it's right next to Wakanda. Anyway, I just want to share, thank you so much. Yesterday was my grandmother's memorial. She passed 9 years ago. And I remember, I'm truly honored to be here to represent her, because I am a legacy. I'm a legacy of hers. I was raised by my mother and my grandmother, who were strong African women who gave me the greatest opportunities in Kenya despite being a girl, sent me to the great schools, and later sent me to the United States to get more opportunities in education. They truly believed and lived the African proverb that when you educate a girl, you educate the community. When you educate a boy, you educate an individual. Not that I'm against boys. But I am grateful to the men and boys that support and call women to greatness, so I truly appreciate that. I am an immigrant woman, proud American now, a wife, a mother, and I am also a registered nurse, among other titles. I would click, I guess, and then something will come. Okay. Today we are here in celebration of the motto by the UN, the International Decade of People of African Descent. And I think it's something, I guess, worth celebrating because it's an issue. So on that note, do you know of any Africans that speak French, Portuguese, German, French, English, Kenya? So you know why, just not to take you, I'm not trying to poop the party, but to take you down memory lane. It's because of colonization. So they adopted the European languages, but Hakuna Matata is Swahili. It's actually Arab blend. There's so many dialects and languages spoken in Africa. But I love what Kenya said earlier from the Black Women of Wealth organization about just let people be people. Let us be us. presenting ourselves from who we are, and that calls for humility. I want to share today about, I found this and I thought it was interesting for the American Community Survey. I don't want to share all the numbers because I love Antonia said a lot of numbers. I'm a nurse, so I'm not going to give you a lot of graphs and numbers. But as you can see that African immigrants in the USA, first of all, this is the US labor force. And as you can see that women, I think, contribute about 50.8% of that, or 78% in healthcare. That's a lot of women. And that's a lot of labor from women. Moving on to Minnesota, around 10% of Minnesota labor force is immigrants, and up to 7%, which has gone up 7% from 10 years ago. And I think it's nice to talk about that, like, I can call her Mama Melvin by her permission. In Africa, when you're someone's mother, you're called by your child's kind of title. And being that she's Mayor Carter's mom, I can call her Mama Melvin. So, with your permission, which she gave already. So I think that what I wanted to say is that from that voice of why this is important, as immigrants of African descent, we do give a lot to the economy, unlike the rhetoric that you hear from the current administration that we are worthless or we are rapists and that we need to be sent away or something. We really truly contribute positive outcomes to our economy. This is again another graph that I got from the Minnesota records of the new American economy, that 12.2 billion earned from immigrants in Minnesota. 1.1 went to the state and local taxes, and 2.2 billion goes to federal taxes. So you're left with 8.9 spending power. And for those Africans in the house, you know where MoneyGram is, right? And for cultural humility, MoneyGram is a way of sending money to Africa. And you know where the calling cards are. So, so in speaking of gender inequality, which is real, I love what Toni Carter, Mayor Melvin's mom, said this morning when she was presenting or acting as Rose, and she said that I have been standing right there with you. And it's like, as a woman of African descent, I can say that gender inequality is real because we've been living it. It's not data in the books, it's what we experience, or our community experiences. So going back to this graph, why am I speaking about this from a health perspective? As a nurse, that's an interesting graph, I guess I should say. You know, in Minnesota, there's 105,000 registered nurses. And out of those 105,000, only 7% are nurses of color. And out of those 7%, 3% are African Americans. So those of African descent were in that 3%. So it calls for some kind of shift or change or doing something. After seeing these numbers, when I went back for my graduate studies, I did a little research in Brooklyn Park, comparing one of the high schools with one in Edina, and looking at the disparities and the gaps, and looking at it, these same students, they didn't choose to be in this location or to be born here or into this, yet they are both kind of fighting for Harvard and the Staffords and all these big schools, but opportunities are denied. Like Viola Davis said, like you heard, the only difference between a black and white woman is opportunity. And it's exactly that for those students as well, location and just being denied. So given the tools, people can truly excel. From that, I thought, okay, what am I gonna do for myself as an African nurse now? I knew I needed to do something. Martin Luther King says, if I cannot do great things, I can do small things in a great way. And that's what I did. So I decided, you know what? I'm going to create a network, a group, a Facebook group overnight for African nurses. I added a few friends from my network. There was about 150 overnight. By the end of the week, we were 500. The next week, we were 800. And we were like, okay, wait, we're growing. we need to do something about this. So we called a few friends in the cities and we got together. The second year now, we are registered 501c3, doing a lot of community public health teaching, support to mentor our nurses into leadership. As clearly as you can know those who live in the cities, if you look at the hospitals or organizations that you work, a lot of black nurses are at the bedside. They're at the nursing homes. They're in the group homes. They're doing a lot of clinical work, and they're compassionate and excellent. But there's a lot of us, too, that want to be in leadership. There's a lot of them that can be great administrators and researchers and doing great work, but they're missing. So if we look at the data from just gender, okay, so for example, another research shows women in healthcare account for 78% of the labor force, 14% are executive officers, but those are 14% of women. You know how much percent of women of color? 4. 12% board directors, and can you guess how many women of color? None. 0%. So, and there's none CEOs in the healthcare field. So I want to shout out to some people that are our allies that support black women. And I'm talking about the Caucasian and other people that support black women. Jeannie from Augsburg, Mary Turner, the M&A president. I love people that believe in diversity and celebrate our talents, expertise, and gifts that are God-given. After seeing and living through these similar struggles, through this group, we met and talked about what can we do. Our mission is to empower nurses, provide resources, and create opportunities to improve the lives of underserved populations. The vision is every person will have opportunities to achieve the greatest potential. Our goals is really to promote cultural diversity, share immigrant stories, share African health practices and view of disease. I was talking about an example that I can give in cultural humility. There's this culture that takes their children, if their teeth are crooked, and they put metals in there and they drag them until they become straight. Can you imagine? And this same culture, when you go to seek help when you're sick, they make sure you strip all your clothes, and then they give you this thin cloth, and it's open in the back, and you're just supposed to wear it. So when you see an African boil their soup, and they want to drink that for blood pressure, be a little bit understanding. That's called cultural humility. Because Mandela says the key to freedom is education. I don't want to take your time. Let's empower each other through education, self-taught, learn, go to conferences, learn a lot of things, educate yourselves. And our goal is we've developed a workshop that creates strategies or improves diversity through training. And our goal is to also help in closing that nursing shortage percentage. A study or a report lately, a study was actually done by the U of M here that showed that immigrants are the key to the Minnesota future prosperity. It shows a kind of a breakdown of every department from health to human services. And there's another report that came out by the US News that as the healthcare workforce ages, foreign nurses will step up again. And so the action plan moving forward, I have just a couple things to share with you. Those two things are culture humility training. And I know a lot of people are like, what is culture humility? So join us in our network and call us, we'll come and share with you. But because of time, because I know Toni is looking at me from here, but just to share about culture humility, it's basically letting people be open to learning. Culture competence is a lot of generalization, that all Asian people drink warm water. Or all Africans are born in Africa. That's not true. That's kind of assumptions. That's what competency does. Humility makes you realize, like, well, Lyna might be from Kenya, but even though you're from Kenya, we may not be raised the same or believe in the same. You may be Christian, I may be Muslim or Muslim the other way. Just learning to accept people where they are and creating conversations to learn more about people. building those relationships that you've heard about all morning. So I wanted to share that in looking at health disparities, there's a lot of things that we learn and speak in this workshop about denying black kids pain medicine just because you're looking at them as subhuman. This is studies by big universities that are showing this. About maybe the possibility of going in for a physical as a college graduate and being assumed that you're getting a scholarship because of football when you're really going for medicine. So there's a lot of things to learn. The other action plan is also, I will use my grandmother because yesterday was our memorial, play with those that want to play with you. And it's truly that. Collaborate with the people that want to work with you. Build relationships with your networks, the people you meet. Everything that we've done, I love what Kenya said too. Sometimes when you don't find that works and takes care of a need, create it. There's nothing wrong with dreaming. I love what I shared with St. Catherine's students when I was invited the other day, which was sometimes when you're not given space at the negotiating tables, you've gone to school, you've been qualified, you have your degrees, you've learned, you've developed, then what you do is you request humbly to be able to share what you already know, sharing expertise. When they don't give you that, sometimes what you have to do is create your own table and take all the space. And that's what we had to do with our network. So I want to conclude this. I hope I did my 10 minutes. I want to thank the great American women nurses like Mary E. Mahoney, who was the first registered African American. Harriet Tubman, did you know she was a nurse? And she used to take care of the elderly African Americans. Estelle Macy Osborne, who fought for visibility and educational equality of all nurses. I would also like to thank Michelle Obama for not only being a great role model, for all mothers and daughters of African descent, but also reminding us not to slam that door shut once you've made it. Our keynote speaker, Ambassador Linda Thomas, who I had the pleasure of meeting last fall. I'm so happy that she's here with us. And thank you, men, who support all women, because we need those men. And of course, thank you for all the great women and men in this room who came here today to celebrate this beautiful day. I aspire to be filled with knowledge and humility. Let us aspire to be compassionate and build our relationships with humility. Women, if you gain knowledge and expertise and are blessed with all these talents and knowledge and qualifications to make others feel better, think of how empowering that can be when you have all this knowledge in mind, but all of us at heart. Thank you so much.
We just have some marvelous women here with us, and we are learning a lot. I thank you for reminding us of our family story and of our strengths. Keywords, certainly so many of them in your presentation as well. Humility and culture in particular. And a key message that I got from you as we look around for our partners and collaborators is that we are willing to work together with you. Amen. But also, if we have to do it alone, we're doing that too, right? That's right. So that reminds me of the August Wilson play Fences, also, and another favorite line. I just got to tell you, when Troy brought the baby home, we are compassionate, we care, we love. This baby that Troy had with another woman, and Rose said, from now on, this baby got a mama, but you a womanless man. I'm going to work with you or without you. Right. Thank you. All right. Thank you so much. Now I want to bring up, and as she comes up, Clara Sharp from Ahavah Birthworks. I just want you to listen also to Clara's presentation for those keywords and concepts. She's a lactation educator, prenatal educator, common sense childbirth trained, working through the International Center for Traditional Childbearing, trained as a doula, multicultural, historical, and traditional perspectives. And Clara has a background, of course, in community organizing as well as in education. It looks like we're getting it. We're on.
Okay.
Greetings and welcome, welcome everyone. So I'm a woman of very, very few words, which is why you're gonna watch an hour video. Just kidding, just kidding, just kidding. My name is Clara, and my sister and I, Sonia, we started Ahavah Birthworks, which is a doula organization. Does anyone know what a doula is? Raise your hand. I know, Debbie. That's my other sister back there. So raise your hands again so I can see. So many of you know what a doula, that's awesome. So for those of you who don't know what a doula is a birth support person who supports a mother, her family, through prenatal all the way to her birth and also postpartum. So we do non-medical work. We are like a sister friend to that mother and that family. And I'd rather show you what that looks like in this video, and then I'll talk a little bit more about that when I'm done. So here we go. So that's it. So we don't do any medical work. We're there to support the mom. What this video doesn't show is the trials that this mother went through and her experience of having, I'm getting to her personal experience, but the different trials that a lot of Black mothers go through and the lack of support from within the community and from hospitals and clinics, which is why Ahavah is very different. So we're a culturally congruent doula organization, which means that we really believe in something that Sister Kenya said, that how every culture is different. And as Black women, we have a language of our own. And so when you're not comfortable speaking your own language, when you're not comfortable being who you are, especially at a moment when you're birthing, when you need to let everything go and relax, when you're feeling tight and tense and you're not feeling supported, that mom's not going to have the best outcomes. So we believe in providing culturally congruent care. And so I followed this mother for 6 months of her pregnancy, and we became very good friends. And I call her my sister friend. And when she was going into the clinic, they told her baby was not going to be a big baby. She would have a baby under 5 pounds, and she was stressing out. So she reached out, or she was referred to me, to Ahavah, and we just talked about what are some things that you're going through? What is stressing you out? And we worked it out. We just talking to someone who can relate to what these moms are going through means so much. So this woman, she had a very healthy baby, breastfed. She's still breastfeeding. The baby's a little over a year old now. So we really believe in the power of culturally congruent care. We also know that doulas do make a difference in birth outcomes. So less cesarean, less babies in NICUs. There's like so many positive things about having birth support, and we really work well with the medical team. Yeah, and I'm sorry, I apologize, I have a really bad head cold, and I'm like forgetting things. I know I am. So what we've been seeing, so Sonia and I have been doing this work for over 25 years, and I know I look like I'm only 25, so I'm just kidding again. So it's been a long time. We started doing this when we were very young, supporting moms, and we have seen really, really good outcomes. And I would say that we get an overwhelming, we get referrals because there's really no one doing the work that we're doing in terms of providing specific care to those moms who are very, very high risk. And when I say very high risk, mothers who will be birthing by themselves, mothers who have lost previous babies. Sonia, what else am I missing? Okay. Yeah, developmentally delayed moms. We get a lot of those referred to us. And then moms who just really don't have a lot of support. And so we follow them along. We do prenatal education. And we do it from a place of culture always. Because that's, like I said, that's the common language. That's where you gain respect. And folks in the medical field also respect that because they're seeing the outcomes. They're seeing that babies are healthy. They're seeing that moms are healthy. And that is our goal. And I think that's the goal for folks in the medical field. And we know that mother is the first teacher. So if mom is stressed, you're going to have a stressed baby. So to create an environment where aunties, so we're bringing back tradition and we're bringing back the culture and tradition into childbirth. So typically you see mothers who are not encouraging breastfeeding. Well, we have to teach moms, the grandmothers, that, no, this is so healthy for the baby. This is why it's so important for moms who can breastfeed. So it's all about educating the whole village, not just that mom, and creating a support system outside of a doula, which makes a huge impact, and fathers as well. Another thing I was going to mention is that one thing we didn't talk about with health disparities is that how stress affects our pregnancies. And and it affects the children. And what I just learned this year was that Black women age 7 times faster, not on the outside, but internally. Internally, yeah, Black don't crack, but it does on the inside. Our organs are cracking, our heart is cracking, diabetes, high blood pressure is making us crack on the inside. So we're unhealthy, and having someone who can go into the homes, do visits, and talk about, girl, what are you eating? Hot Cheetos, girl? What you know what you're doing? You know what you're doing to your baby with them Takis? Someone said Takis. Yeah, hot Cheetos and Takis, come on now. And so we talk about other alternatives that taste good. And yeah, so all those things are really important. And also one thing that we're excited about is, so right now the doula reimbursement rate is really low. We're doing some political stuff, which I've never saw myself getting into politics. But let me tell you, if any of you in the room want to make a difference, you have to somehow be involved in policies, because if you're not at the table, you're on the table. I don't know who said it, but so I never saw myself being into politics, going to see senators, representatives, and pushing a bill. I wrote a bill. I did. Yes, I did. and so there's a bill out there. There's 2 bills that I'm going to let you guys know about before I leave. So it is Senate File 1275, which is to increase reimbursements to doulas. So right now the reimbursement rate is about $410. That's how much for the whole months and time and hours and days and that I spent with that mom, $410. It's ridiculous. And the outcomes are amazing. So we're asking for an increasement of, Debbie, $750. That's reasonable. So it's still not enough, but we have to start from somewhere. Then there's the other bill, which is Senate File 1737. It's a 2-year grant for doulas run by and for women of color. That's the grant that I wrote, because we know what kind of impact we make in our communities. And we have to be able to, in my mind, you cannot, if we're constantly supporting folks from the outside to come inside, what about the inside? Can't we make a difference? I think we can, and I know that we do. So we need funding just particularly for organizations that are making an impact within the communities. So I thought that was important. And if you guys want to know more, please, I guess, Fartoon will let you know more about that. But those are the bill numbers. And I think I'm done talking. I think it's been 10 minutes, so thank you.
Wonderful, and thank you for giving us the knowledge of your sister friendship with women that helps them with compassionate and culturally congruent care. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. So we are going to move on then to Saidiyo Yusuf, who is an Isuroon program director, and Saidiyo is definitely a leader, serving currently on the advisory committee for St. Mary's University. She's an activist and a refugee. She's a mother of 3, and she has earned her master's degree in healthcare and human services administration from St. Mary's University. I know that we're getting ready over there for Saidiyo's presentation, and that she'll be with us in just a moment. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I didn't know if I would need a speaker because my voice is always loud. My name is Saidiyo Yusuf, and thank you, all of you, for coming today, for supporting women of African descent. I want to thank Isuroon team. Organizing this event was not an easy task. I want to thank Fartoon. She's kind of my shield. I'm hiding behind her as she goes through, all the adjectives. I'm like, go Fartoon, I'm just right behind you, So thank you. I don't know if any of you know the word Isuroon. Can you show me a shine of hand what Isuroon, anybody who knows Isuroon? I see the team. The team doesn't count. Well, everybody who's here today is Isuroon. It means literally loving yourself, being healthy, to give back to the community, because if you're not feeling well, if you don't love yourself, you can't give love. So everybody who's here today and everybody who's watching out there is Isuroon. So I was born in Mogadishu, came all the way. We stopped by Kenya, where we learned Kiswahili. I do speak Kiswahili too. Then we came to Minnesota, all the way. It has not been an easy journey, I tell ya. To be standing today here, it was not easy, both academically and professionally. I love when we talk about health because I started my journey as a nurse too. Yes, as a nurse who weighed 96 pounds, who had to run from East Wing to West Wing. And I'm going, why don't you just give me one side? I would be more productive, you know? So, because, you know, nobody knows me, and they've been working together for 20 years. Therefore, I get all the tough cases. I never get a discharge because my break, then I would not take a break. So I started from Normandale Community College, which I took a lot of prerequisites, after prerequisites. And then is when I realized I needed to be a teacher. I really needed to be a teacher because education is the only way to change people's mind. I remember doing a class twice just because of my color of my skin. You would do well in, you know, in writing, but you don't do well in practical, clinical, because I didn't make the bed specific way. And so I said, you know, I need to come back and teach. And so that people, I had to wait a whole year for that class. So the whole year I was just thinking about, okay, what shall I do? You know, because discrimination do exist. And it's kind of systemized. And so just experience that in a young age. It was very difficult. I almost left school because I had a whole year. I had to take one cardio class, which only one teacher teaches, and it only happens in the fall. So I waited, and I came back to the class, and she says, here you go again. Are you sure you want to be a nurse? Definitely, I'm graduating in May. What can I do? Don't you think you can look for another career, maybe something else in arts? Or I said, no, I really want to be a nurse. The money is good. I have family to feed. So then I said, okay, I went to the nursing world, and I have seen how you can. I was told as a nursing assistant that I had to get 9 people up by 6 or 7, I don't remember. And I go to my manager and I say, why do people have to wake up by 7? This is their home. I'm here shoveling, putting everybody brushing teeth. Some people, their eyes are closed, and I'm putting on clothes. So when people come to the lunch hall, they know whose patients are missing is mine, because I'm taking my sweet time. I can't do 1 hour, 9 patient, you know, even, you know, if there was a bullet under me. So so then I went on and got my Bachelor in Health and Human Services Management to see what can I do by, you know, contributing to leaders and leadership, and how can we cater to people from Africa, especially Somali community. What can I do to support anybody who's doing something that is benefited by the community? And so then I said, okay, now that I know how to do the APA style, I might as well continue. You know, APA is really difficult. You will never use it again, but hey, you have to do it because all the paper has to be in APA format. So then I did my administration, and I realized then that, education is not a destination, but a journey to learn from everybody. I'm still a student. I am a student of the doctorate program, the EDD program. I am those people that ever go to school. You're wondering, when are you going to be done? I haven't learned anything yet, So I have 3 kids. I'm a full-time mom. The head of household, of course, strong women, very hard to contain, I tell ya. And Isuroon is a big part of my life, especially for Toni and everybody at Isuroon. The kind of work we do, it takes a person with thick skin to do it. If you are like those who cry, you can't be in nonprofit. You're trying to advocate, fight for people whose right has been taken away, who don't even know their right, teaching them that this is your right. You have the right to choose doctors. You have the right to go to 10 doctors. You have the right to change, a person who's translating for you. You have the right to say, I don't want this nurse. Because you can tell so many things, not by language that's spoken, but non-verbally communication. You can tell who has good intention and who doesn't. And you don't even have to know their language. And so we empower and engage women to do what is necessary to be done in the community, to vote, to fight for their rights, to fight with the school system, public schools. Yeah. So, we teach them everything we know by being here. So I tell people always, if I don't teach you anything, at least I'll teach you how to get to Minneapolis the easiest way. Those are my 3 kids. Getting them out by 8 o'clock is a task. They poop right at the front of the door. And the whole of last night I was praying, please God, please don't let the school call me in the middle of my speech. They haven't yet. Because I want to share this story with what I'm going through with my kids. On Friday, I was called by the school and they called me 20 times. So whenever I'm speaking, I always put my phone upside down. And then I finish my speech and I'm looking and it's 20 missed calls. And I'm going, what happened? I passed. My kid is on the spectrum. So they said, your kid, said the word KILL. And I'm going, okay. So we called the squat unit. All I could remember is Hennepin squat unit. And I'm thinking, is that the canine unit or what? So I felt like one side of my body kind of paralyzed. I am on high dose of muscle relaxant today because of Friday, what happened. So they said, the kid has a plan. Yeah. And I'm going, he has a plan? And I'm like, if he had a plan, he would plan to have a good day at school. And I'm sorry to say, he doesn't even know what that word means. You're just like telling him, how are you going to do it? And he will tell you. He's a very smart kid, smarter than me. So at that moment, I went running. I was told you have 20 minutes before Hennepin crisis unit get here. And I am teaching parent engagement in Lutheran Social Services. And I live in West Bloomington. And I'm going 20 minutes, so what exit shall I take? So I go there and I tell them, I've just dropped the kid at 10 o'clock. What happened, And it's a part of our protocol that if somebody says KILL, I don't want to say the word. Somebody might hear, we have to do this procedure. And I told them, this kid goes through therapies and he probably doesn't know. And I asked him, why did you say these words? And everybody was there. And he's like, because everybody calls me crazy. And I go, okay. And so imagine a mother who doesn't speak the language, who's new to the country, who has 8 other kids, is called to the school and she sees all these things happening, I mean, how difficult it is. So our work is cut off, what we have to do from experience, from being in the system. And I always like this quote. I love the last end. He just might be the teacher who turns you into the person you're supposed to be. Because we all assume that we're gonna have Tom Cruise. All 3 kids are not the same. And you will learn ways that, you know, that they teach you, that you even communicate with them. So we always have this thought of, you know, we're gonna have this perfect kid who, you know, is Harvard graduate. We might, but everybody's not the same. They might teach you something or two while you're growing up too. I'm not going to go all through all this, but I love this quote that I put in. It's not us, it's just the system and the process. I love this sentence because everywhere I go, that's what I heard. We're doing all we can. It's not us, it's the system. So I'm going, where is the damn system? Can I talk to the system? You guys are in the wrong place. So it's always about system and process. So I'm always saying, if a constitution can be amended, what is a system? You know, if I get a stroke, who's gonna provide for the 3 kids? You know, you guys are professionals. You're supposed to assess the severity of the, you know, the threat, and then make your judgment, and not give me a heart attack, you know. And so my recommendation through what I've gone through in Minnesota is be positive. To have a mission, of course, and I love this 80-20 principle, you know, just making sure what you put in is what it comes out better. And that's why today we're trying to reach all of you so that you can make it move forward, so that you can let everybody know about Isuroon and Isuroon's work, and how we engage and empower women and girls, especially East African, focusing more on the Somali community. Always lead by an example. You know, sometimes I wanna remove the hood out of me and say, you know what? I don't wanna say the F word, but you know. But sometimes, you know, but you have to be the person everybody like looks up to and be proper, and that's a lot of responsibility. You know, you have to be an example, because my middle name is Muhammad. So I have to know more religion than anybody else because Muhammad, you know. And I am a woman and I am black and, you know, I work. So I always have to listen and talk less and listen more and lead by an example. And I am willing to answer any questions. I think I'm almost out of time because somebody took a lot of time. You know, somebody took a lot of time. But thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks to all of you for your story. Yes, it does take us some time to get to know each other and to relax. We are family. This is about our stories, our community and our culture. It's about our strengths. And saying that, we know that we're strong enough to adjust just a little bit so that we can open up to the audience and ask for your questions. A lot has been shared. Thank you. We do have some questions, and a mic will be coming to you, I think. Yes. We'll take just a few moments for a few questions for our panelists.
Hello, thank you everyone. You guys are amazing. Empowered women empower other women. Right. And I'm a student. I'm going to school to pursue my social work and education. And I'm actively involved in my community. And a lot of the times I see myself, I am the only black woman in events like that for the education, because Minnesota has the worst achievement gap. And there's a lot of discipline disparities, and I want to be able to change that. And I know that education is the only way to really make change. And one of the things that I struggle with is having mothers come and participate and listen. And I try to talk with them, but it's like, nobody wants to hear this young girl, or what is she going to tell us that we don't already know? And so I have a really hard time having mothers come, and if you guys can give me any advice on that.
So you are asking just if they can comment a little bit on, right, on your specific dilemma.
Yeah, like how engaging mothers to come and participate when just even adults just of color. Because usually a lot of times it's the reason why they don't want to come is like, well, what are we going to do? We've been trying to be the system.
All right.
The institutionalized
Yeah.
racism, and it's hard, and people do say ethnic.
Thank you. Brief comments on how we
Can
can.
I say something? So a lot of times, I don't know if you guys can hear me. Can you hear me? Okay. A lot of times people, those moms that you're talking about, don't see how they can make a difference in the system. It just seems so far removed. And those women, I can guarantee you, they're already struggling just to even sometimes get out of bed, especially if they're moms. So when you're providing a space, it has to be, you have to consider, does she have transportation to get there? Is there going to be food so she can feed her kids? Is there going to be childcare? Because she can't concentrate on what you have to say. If she's got 8 children, or I have 6, and they're running around, and I have one that's autistic as well, you're like, oh God, I got to go. I can't do this. So all those things have to be considered, and maybe. And then they also have to see how, like, what is this going to look like? Like, I can come, if I can get there, like, how is this going to impact my life? So I think having real conversations, and that's my opinion, yeah, having a conversation.
Very true. All those things do come into play, and we are working with figuring that out, but just making it come to having more so involved with the students, and then having the kids and supporting them.
Okay.
And having building one-on-one relationships.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah.
Thanks for those comments.
Yes.
Can I also comment on the same?
Yes.
So everything you've said, I don't want to repeat to be redundant, but just so you know, you're not alone. I think just to remember that all the women, the nonprofit women or the leaders in the community, you're not alone. And we need to support one another as we do this work, because you have to be passionate to do it. And I think sometimes you have to start on the ground. One lady said about adult infants. If I can speak from the immigrant perspective, sometimes people don't know. I think you spoke about people not knowing their rights. So it starts from the ground up, and talking circles, building relationship, the African way of going back, if there's food, then let's talk. So bringing something that is inviting. So being culturally sensitive and appropriate, because I don't think they don't want to be there, because when I speak to the women about being involved in the schools and volunteering, they want to be there, but they got to work a double to provide here and over here. So just being respectful and, again, humility.
Yeah.
I can also comment on your question. I always scare people first. Yes, I do. And then I work my way up, and I say, calm down. Everything will be fine. We need more of you. So showing people the bigger picture, like this can happen to you, whatever this parent is going through, it can happen to you, but collectively we can change things.
That's right.
That showing them the bigger picture that, you know, my mom always said, and I always quote my mom, I feel like she's the biggest educator in my life. She always says, "Farkaliya fol ma dhaqdo." Those of you who understand Soma, who don't understand, it means like you can't wash your hand with one finger. You need all 5.
All right.
So just reminding people that collectively we can put a great impact on people's lives.
Yeah. Did you want to? Okay. One more or two?
I have so much to say, so because of time, I'm going to make it really short. First of all, shout out to the Kenyans. I was in Nairobi in December. It's still as beautiful as ever. I just wanted to mention something, going from what Antonia had said. Health in all policies is ideal, and that's where we want to go. And there's a need for communities. So I work with data and data analysis, and the data does not represent us. So there's a need for engagement to include, communities that are disparate. And that means that in your channels, encourage people to attend some of these town hall meetings, to attend some of these sessions that will influence decisions that are being made for them. I also wanted to add that engagement is all good, but there needs to be also transparency. It's not just about starting a marriage, it's about maintaining it and sustaining that marriage. I also wanted to say that when I came to the United States, it was actually very, it was uplifting to every time to see a black person and I start speaking and obviously you can hear an accent and they go, where are you from, my sister? I'm from Kenya. Oh, I'm from Nigeria, my sister, this and that. And I really like that, and we don't really have that a lot. We still have some divisions, and for those of you who remember our anthem, our Kenyan anthem, there's a line that says, Natukae na undugu amani na uhuru. Let's live with brotherhood, peace, and unity. And there's also the saying in Kenya, united we stand, divided we fall. So it's not about, oh, I'm not from Africa, I'm African American, or I'm not from this place, I'm from that place. At the end of the day, our outcomes are the same. In the eyes of an employer, we're still that black person that might be paid less because of the color of our skin. I also wanted to say that as far as education, I'm with you. I'm not stopping, and I really don't know why. Well, actually, I do know why, because I need to have an extra master's degree so that I can be paid the same as a white person with a bachelor's degree, or so that I can be in the same room as people that don't have the same as me. And then at the same time, most of us from other countries or with, from ethnic minorities, my degree is not just my degree, it's my family's degree. Like, we're doing this together. So I'm continuing. But to the point of the young lady at the bottom, education is not the only way. We need to respect and acknowledge the street PhDs. Yes. I have learned a lot from people that don't have half the education I have. It's all about togetherness. Yes. I also, to sum it up, I just wanted to say on those cohesions that all of you are talking about, I would like to see you walk the walk, talk the talk. At the end of this meeting, I can leave and I will never see any of you again. You won't really care about the other people that are sitting here. So when you're in those networks and after the meeting when you're talking, don't just talk to the other person that has the nice looking business suit. Try and find that girl that has the head drop, or that person that doesn't really have that confidence to come and talk to you. Find out how are you doing, what's going on in your life. Give them your business card. Don't ask them to give you, don't ask if, don't wait for somebody to give you their business card. One of the things that has helped me get to where I am and hopefully get even further is the connections that I've made, and they've not always been easier. I know you can tell from the way I'm talking that I'm not an introvert, but it's not always easy. Come on, really? It is not always easy. Some people don't have that. One of the things that has helped me get to where I am is because I've had references. Be a reference for somebody in this room, and that means getting to know that person, because some of us don't have the good relationships that we need at our places of work. So I'm just challenging all you panelists and all of you with the really nice business suits. Talk to people that don't have those. Just go to somebody new and ask them, what's going on in your lives? How can I help you? And don't let this meeting just be something that continues next year. Thank you.
I want to say thank you. Yeah. I want to say thank you to all of you. It's true that we are going to need to wrap up, but the comments that we have just heard help us to bring this back. This is about our family and community. It is absolutely about our story. It's about our strengths. And most of all, as Dr. Bloomberg said earlier, we need to tell the story with all of its volume, with all of its specificity, the good, the bad, the ugly, the marvelous. And yes, the answer to your question is all of us are challenged and must take the opportunity to meet the challenge that you just gave us. That's right. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you to our panelists. Give them a big round of applause.
Thank you. I'm going to very quickly, I'm Mary Curtin, and I'm a diplomat in residence here at the Humphrey School. And it's my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for today, Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, who probably doesn't need much introduction here. I think, as a lot of you know, she served more than 3 decades as a Foreign Service officer in the State Department, serving as Assistant Secretary for African Affairs, as Director General of the Foreign Service, as Ambassador to Liberia, and in many positions dealing with humanitarian issues, especially refugee issues around the world. And we've heard a lot this morning about role models. And as a former Foreign Service officer myself, it really is an honor to have here someone who was a role model for many, many men and women of color and not of color in the State Department over her decades of service. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield. Welcome her back to the Humphrey School. Thanks. Do you want me to move? You don't need this.
I don't need that. Okay, Thank you very much. You know, I don't know where to start. You know, I have, when I do speeches, and particularly when I'm writing them myself, thank you, Mary. When I'm writing them myself, I rewrite them until I deliver it. So I'm going to be rewriting the speech as we talk, having listened to all of you today. This has just been extraordinary. And I can't think of a better place to spend International Women's Day than with all of you here today, hearing your stories and hearing about your families and really identifying with all of the stories that you've told. So I'm going to look down for a minute so that I can express my thank yous and not forget to thank all of you for being here, but thank particularly Dean Bloomberg for inviting me, to thank Fatoon and your team for putting this together and giving me the opportunity to speak with all of you today. You know, as you were speaking, and particularly this last group, I don't know the extent to which those of you who came here as Somali refugees know how much I have been involved in your lives. I started out as a refugee coordinator working on refugee issues in Washington, working on our resettlement program many, many years ago, probably when most of you were either not born or you were small children. And my first job in refugees was to help bring up the numbers of African refugees we were bringing to the United States, and that number was 2,000. And we couldn't meet the ceiling. And my job was to meet the ceiling of 2,000. And notice I said ceiling. And in 1989, I failed because I brought in 1,982 refugees, and I missed that ceiling just by a few, and I felt so disappointed. But one of the things that I accomplished before I left that job was to bring that ceiling up to 25,000, 10 times more. I'm rewriting the speech here, guys. And I would go on to eventually live in Kenya as the refugee coordinator in Kenya. And I don't know if there's anybody who started their lives out to the United States from Dadaab refugee camp. So I've spent many, many days of my life in Dadaab refugee camp trying to figure out how we could find a permanent solution for the people who were living in those 3 camps in Kenya. There were about 120,000 refugees back in 1989. And I've recently learned that that number is over 400,000 now. So I failed again in finding a solution to that refugee crisis. But I have to tell you, all of us will continue to try. Now I'll go back to my speech. So the global theme of this year's celebration is pressing for progress. And this is an extraordinarily powerful theme given the environment that we are in today, when the progress that we've worked so hard to achieve is being compromised and questioned and pushed back, particularly for women of African descent. Your theme, promoting and supporting women of African descent is equally relevant as we see African women, women of African descent rising, but also, as you've heard today, continuing to face immense challenges in health and in education, in the public sector, in the private sector. And these issues you've covered, I think, so well today that I don't really need to go into them. But there are two things that struck me as I heard the discussion going on today. The first is that in 2018, we are still having this discussion about the role of women and the need to promote and support women of African descent. And secondly, in 2018, we still need to have this discussion, particularly as it relates to supporting women of African descent. So again, this is such a relevant topic that you have for us today. We women, both of African descent and others, have come a long ways since in 1972, when 10 years before I joined our Foreign Service, women who were married in our diplomatic corps had to quit. They had to leave their jobs. This has been my field of endeavor, so I feel more comfortable talking about this. The numbers of African American women in the Foreign Service at that time, you probably could count on one hand and probably would not have to use all of your fingers. We've come a long way since in 1981 when Sandra Day O'Connor was nominated by President Reagan as the first woman on the Supreme Court, and now there are three, one of whom is of Hispanic descent. And we've come a long way since the first woman was appointed Secretary of State under Bill Clinton in 1996, Madeleine Albright, who is my current employer, who has gone on to start a successful commercial diplomacy business, to be followed by the first African-American woman to be named Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, who was appointed by President Bush, and then Hillary Clinton, who was appointed by President Obama. And the reason I'm going through all of this is because it is women in positions of power, whether it's our Supreme Court, it's our Department of State or other departments in the United States who will bring the issues of women to the forefront. Globally, there have been about 160 women elected as heads of state and government, including my good friend Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the former president of Liberia, who just made history by turning her country over after 12 years of rule to a democratically elected president. And Ellen, as we like to call her, was the first woman to be elected president in Africa, and that was in 2006. There was a second one, Joyce Banda, but right now at this moment, there's not a single woman head of state in Africa. But in 2016, 2 years ago, in the United States, we could not elect our first woman president. And we're still discussing whether it's the right time to have a woman president in the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the right time. And why not a woman of African descent? So let me say again, we have come a long way, but we still have a long way to go, particularly as it relates to women achieving economic parity to our male colleagues. I just learned from a young woman who was doing research on this issue over the weekend who called me that in the private sector, at senior levels, this is senior levels of the private sector, women still only earn 80 cents to a man's dollar. But imagine that figure, what that figure must be in Africa and among African Americans. So again, let me say, we have a long ways to go. On the positive side, since Madam C.J. Walker, the first Black woman to be declared a millionaire, developed her own line of Black hair products that we're all using today in some form or another, we've come a long way. We have women of African descent in businesses across the board and across the globe in every sector, successfully navigating the entrepreneurial world and opening doors for new opportunities for other women of African descent. I've gotten to know a dynamic young woman, and I want you guys to remember her name. She's an American of Ghanaian descent, Rahama Wright, and she's developed and is successfully marketing her own brand of shea butter products, Shea Aline. And these products are now being sold in Whole Food stores in the Washington area. And I know that Rahama is going to go nationwide and global. But she needs all of your support. This is about supporting each other. And we need to support her and others like her who have dared to start their own businesses so that they can become our next generation of millionaires. That's how they get supported. So again, I've been rewriting this speech, so let me go back to really what I came here to talk to you about during the short period that I have with you today, is to kind of share some advice and some strategies on how women of African descent can support efforts to lift up women and build networks that are supportive in every field of endeavor. And while I'm focusing on women of African descent, I think what I'm sharing with you today has really global relevance and can be used by women across the board. I always tell my class that I go by the rule of 5. I'll come up with 5, a list of 5, and that doesn't mean my list is all-inclusive, but I figure 5 is what you can write down fast, and it's what you can remember if you're not writing. So I always come up with a list of 5. So I'm going to share with you 5 of my recommendations for how we women of African descent can be supportive of each other. If I might paraphrase my old boss and the first woman to be elected by a major party to run for president, Hillary Rodham Clinton, and she ought to be president. She said that when you invest in women, they invest in others. They send their kids, particularly their girls, to school. They invest in their families. They invest in their communities. They pay back. So my first advice and strategy is that we must pay back. We must look back to lift up people behind us. We must mentor and support each other. We must ensure that we, who have been successful in every field of endeavor, that we help other women to achieve success as well. And this kind of reminds me of the crab theory, and all of you have heard it. You've heard the metaphor of the crabs in the bucket or the pot of boiling water, who all could escape if the ones lower down didn't pull them back. I have the opposite of that. The opposite side of that is that instead of being pulled down by the people at the bottom of the bucket, the crabs at the bottom of the bucket, imagine if the crabs at the top look back, look down, and pull people up. So the crab theory can be looked at in different ways. We women must look back. We must look back to pull others up with us, and particularly in Africa and among the African American community, who continue in almost every endeavor to be second-class citizens. But there are some of us who are at the top, and it is our responsibility at the top of this boiling pot to look down and pull those people behind us up with us. One of the key equalizers for women and girls, and we've talked about this today, whether it's in Africa or in the US or other places in the world, is education. And I read a recent report that stated, providing girls with good education is vital for a country's development. When women are equipped with learning and share decisions about families and livelihoods, the productivity of the society rises. When I was ambassador to Liberia a few years ago, I spoke at a local high school. In fact, it was a very small village high school. And as I was speaking, what I was struck by was the excitement of the mothers in the room. they were dancing and they were cheering and they were shouting. And so in rewriting my speech like I always do, I looked up at the mothers and I said, how many of you mothers can read and write? And there was silence. And people looked down and nobody raised their hand. And it was like I had doused them with a bucket of cold water. Their enthusiasm died and none of them raised their hands. And I realized for a moment that I'd made a mistake. Seeing their embarrassment, I shared with them my own story of my own mother, who, like them, had been at my graduation, her first daughter graduating from high school, with tremendous excitement. And herself never having graduated from high school, married to a man who was totally illiterate, my father. My mother would go back to high school and get her high school diploma nearly 20 years after I got my high school diploma. It took her 20 years to do it, but she did it. She did it, and that's what I shared with those women in the room, and I encouraged the students, their children, to set up an adult literacy program for their parents and to educate their mothers. That was in 2009. I am still getting messages from this school of the hundreds of women that have learned, have gone on and gotten high school diplomas and who can read and write because their children look back and taught them to do that. And imagine how much that community is building and growing. Imagine the power that these women who had enough power to make sure that their kids were educated, imagine their power now that they are educated. This is about looking back and pulling others up. My second recommendation and strategy is that we must look for opportunities to make a difference in our families, in our communities, and our nation. And every single one of you in this room have done that. I heard it as I listened to speakers. I heard it as I listened to questions. This is a bit of advice that you don't need from me. You're already doing that. Whether you're volunteering in a local school, being a big sister to someone who is less fortunate than you, there are so many girls who are in our community who just need a nod of approval. They just need a helping hand. And we all need to look for those opportunities. I think, was it you, Judge, someone said we should tell our stories. So the person you see standing here in front of you today, and I always talk about this in terms of the first chapters of your life do not necessarily define what the last chapters of your life will look like. I grew up in an extraordinarily poor family, in a poor community. Imagine an uneducated black man and an uneducated black woman with 8 children. And so poverty was part of my existence. But why am I here today? I'm here because somebody along the way gave me a nod. Somebody along the way thought that there was some possibility, thought that I deserved their attention. And there were many somebodies like that in my life who looked for the opportunity to make a difference to me in my life. And I have paid that back many times over and continue to. But we also must continue to look for opportunities to support each other. We must look for opportunities to support black businesses. We must buy Rahama Wright's Shea Helene products, because I know that what she is doing is not all about her. She's buying shea butter from women in Ghana who were probably getting pennies for their product until she put together this business package that included the women getting better paid for their product. So we must work to support each other. Third, you got the other two, right? Third, we have to be role models. How many of you have seen the picture that I heard went viral of the little 2-year-old looking at the picture of Michelle Obama. It was just amazing. It brought tears to my eyes. My eyes are watering up now just thinking of that little girl. So here's what being a role model does for you. That is what it does for our children, that they can see other people who look like them, who have their same skin color, who have their same hair texture, being successful. They need to see women who look like them. They need to define beauty in their own terms. To support others, you must be a person that a young person wants to model themselves after. In Liberia, little girls now know that they can be president. Imagine that. They know that they can be president. All over Africa, little girls know because of Ellen Johnson Sirleaf that they can be a president. That's very powerful. My fourth recommendation is stand up. Don't wait for others to do it. And that was said here today as well. So I didn't need to give this speech. It's in everybody's comments. Do it yourself. Do it yourself. Don't wait for other people to do it for you. I don't have to explain this, but when I think about the women's movement, I think about the march in Washington in January of 2017 that brought thousands of women in Washington, millions of women who stood up all over the United States and all over the world to fight for women's rights. And I was really buoyed by that. We as women must continue to stand up. We cannot be silent in the face of our realities. When the Black Lives Matter movement stood up after several high-profile shootings of Black men, I too, a mother of a Black boy, realized that I had to stand up too. So here I was, the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, and I wake up early one morning, and this is after the shooting that took place here in Minnesota, when I watched this young Black man sitting in his car seat, bleeding to death, while his girlfriend and her little girl watched. And I realized that I could be the mother of that child, that man, that could have been my son. And so I walked into my office that morning, like, this is not going to be a regular day for me. I had a regular 8:30 in the morning staff meeting where we came together to talk about all the things that were happening in Africa, whether it was the kidnapping of girls in by Boko Haram, the fighting in South Sudan, the conflict in Central African Republic, and none of that mattered to me that morning. The only thing that mattered to me is that I wanted to talk about what was happening to our young Black men. And I'd gotten an email a text message from my nephew, who was a policeman. And he said to me, "Auntie, it's hard out there. When I'm in my uniform, I have a bullseye on my back, and when I'm out of my uniform, I have a bullseye on my back. I'm not sure what to do." So I was an angry Black woman. I was an angry mother. And I walked in and I said, "I want to talk about this." And someone said, "Well, it doesn't really have any resonance for diplomacy." And I thought, oh, but it does. It does. So I started what I called a conversation on race in the State Department. And nobody wanted, everybody was doing this, like, what is she doing? And I started it in a small kind of gathering of my senior staff. And I told them, I'm an angry Black mother today because I know that Black boy could have been my son. And so we talked about it, and what came out of this, hearing from my white colleagues, when I said to them, when my son goes out, my son is a successful Black man. BMW is what they call them, Black man working. But every single day, if my phone rings, I'm scared that something has happened to him. And if he goes out to dinner at night, I'm afraid that I want to talk to him on the phone every single day. And my white friend said, I never think about that when my sons go out. I don't hear from them for 2 weeks at a time. And I don't think about it. If I don't hear from my son every night, there's trouble, because I'm worried something has happened to him. And that's what we all, as Black mothers, go through every single day. That's part of our existence, it's part of our lives. It doesn't matter what class you are. It doesn't matter how successful your children are. It doesn't matter where you live. You worry about this every single day. Well, this conversation on race became a huge deal. We took it abroad. I took it to South Africa, where I sat with a group of people saying, do you people ever talk about race? It was a taboo subject. You live it, but you don't talk about it. We have to talk about it because it's part of our everyday lives. You know it, and you feel it, and you understand it. Today, as we sit comfortably in this room, ladies and gentlemen, hundreds, if not thousands, of young girls in Nigeria are being held captive by Boko Haram. The most recent attack, when more than 100 girls were taken, didn't even get a peep on the news. I got a call from BBC wanting to talk about it, and when I walked in, and it was a week later, normally these things happen, I get calls immediately. And they said, why didn't anybody talk about this? And I said to them, why are you not reporting on this? Because it doesn't matter. Black lives do matter. And we have to make sure. My first tweet this morning, and I'm not a prolific tweeter, but I've sent out 3 tweets today, 2 of them since I've been sitting in this room. But my first tweet today was that as we commemorate International Women's Day, we not forget those girls. Because imagine the suffering that they are experiencing right now only because they wanted to be educated and their parents wanted to educate them. So we cannot forget those girls. We need to stand up, ladies. We need to stand up. So my 5th and final one, and this was talked about today as well. Like I said, I didn't need to give this speech. My final strategy is vote. And not just in presidential elections, but you need to vote in local elections. That's exactly what's on my paper. You need to vote for your city councilman. You need to vote for your school boards. You need to vote for your state legislators. You need to vote for your governors. All of these, and county commissioners. You need to vote, period. You need to vote. Your vote counts. Imagine if Black women had not voted in the election in Alabama. We would have a racist child molester sitting in the Senate. Do you think that he would support issues that benefit women and girls? No. Imagine the Virginia gubernatorial election, where Black women voted in record numbers and delivered that election to the Democratic candidate. And I'm not telling you what party to vote for. I'm not partisan. Well, not too much. I used to not be partisan. I'm a little partisan now. But what I'm saying to you is that your vote matters regardless of the party you are from. We must galvanize our voting power into a strong interest group, and candidates must know if they seek our vote, they want our support to be elected, they have to earn that vote. There was a state election in Virginia between a Republican and Democratic candidate. The Democratic candidate was a woman. She lost it by 1 vote. 1 vote. Every vote counts. Every vote counts. I had an experience when Obama was running for the Democratic nomination, and we had a primary in Virginia. And normally I get up to go vote at 6 o'clock in the morning. I line up early in the morning, but that morning I was running late, so I decided I would wait until the evening. And the polls closed at 7. My husband picked me up from work at 5:30, and there was an ice storm. And I literally, I live 5 miles from my office. And the voting place is near my house. We were 1 block from the voting place at 7 o'clock when the polls closed. I didn't vote. And I have learned a valuable lesson from that: go in the morning. You don't know what's going to happen in the evening. And fortunately, it wasn't 1 vote that he needed, but it could have been. So it really is important to organize yourselves to vote and try to get others to vote as well. Get your neighbors. Take your neighbors out with you. Take your children. I mean, young people, this millennial generation didn't feel it was important to vote. You know, my son was like, Hillary got it. I don't need to vote. I got him out of bed at 5:30 in the morning and took him out to vote. You know, you have to be politically involved. You know, I was in a taxi in Los Angeles during the election, and I had this Somali taxi driver who said to me he couldn't vote for a woman. He was voting for Trump. And so I said to him, when he puts you back on a plane to go home, remember Linda. And I know he's remembering me now. He might already be back on a plane. But again, I'm trying not to be partisan. Voting is important. And I will quote, who was it that said this? One of our speakers, Clara. Where are you, Clara? Did she leave? Okay, Clara was the one who said, if you're not at the table, if you're not at the table, you're on the table. And what that means is you need to vote. And you need to meet your politicians. You need to go and talk to them. You need to draft bills and participate in the process. It's not enough to complain. It's not enough to be miserable. It's not enough to be a victim. You have to be an active victim so that you can change the trajectory of what is happening in your lives. Let me end with the theme we started with for International Women's Day and the theme for the conference. If we are to promote and support women of African descent, we must continue pressing for progress. We cannot stand on the sidelines and allow the progress that we have achieved be lost because of complacency. And finally, I have to tell you that I am a perpetual optimist. My glass is always half full. And for those of you who've seen the Black Panther movie and the powerful roles played by women of African descent in that movie, Wakanda's imaginary success is possible for Africa, for women of African descent, both here and all over the world. Let's stand up and press forward. Thank you.
So quickly, before we go to lunch, I have someone who lost their cell phone, Akua Yamoa. I have a cell phone here. And then we will enjoy Afro-Deli lunch. And talking about supporting women, we have an author who is selling her book. The book is called African Women Connect. by Rita Jackson Abolo. Please, she's sitting outside if you can help her purchase some of the books. And we should be here soon. Thank you so much. I did it.